Hi, welcome to my channel. I'm going to talk about curved architecture. In prehistoric times, most human shelters were not as rectangular as the squares we live in today. Early humans are often thought of as dwelling in caves because that is where we find traces of them. Caves are considered to be a winter shelter. In the summer there was need for a temporary shelter. This means the beginning of something approaching architecture. Humans developed tents in a V shape. Dutch-German philosopher Peter Sloterdijk calls the first residential housings initially stops and waiting rooms. Peter Sloterdijk mentions houses as stops for ceased life. Housing means can't leave. Here you can find the origin of thinking in terms of sowing and reaping. The old High German word bur means not only the house, the room or the cell, but also the cage where poultry is kept. In Swedish it means judgment. Who is willing to wait for the plant to grow has to install himself in a cage and wait. The first house is a machine for the containment of a long time. Once humans began to settle down to the business of agriculture instead of hunting and gathering, permanent settlements become a factor of life. Mesopotamian structures, known to be first buildings similar to the concept of a village, were following the curvilinear form. A lot of the architectural forms in the prehistoric times has roots in mystical beliefs and rituals. Curved and circular forms were a big part of that. Jericho is usually quoted as the earliest town we know. It was a small settlement in about 8000 before Christ. The builders of Jericho used a new technology, curved bricks shaped from mud and baked hard in the sun. The round tent-like house reached a more complete form in Chirokitia, a settlement of about 6500 before Christ in Cyprus. Most of the rooms here have a dome-like roof in corbelled stone or brick. Nowadays it is extremely hard to find a curved form in designs. It seems straight lines and rectangulars have proved to be of more practical use. There is always concern over functionality, construction method and eventually costs. Maybe property dimensions, city zoning restrictions, pipelines and infrastructure force the designer to be rectangular. Maybe it has to do with the Greek invention of post and lintel or the Roman grid line. Clear is that the construction materials are designed for the rectangular system. In theory it makes sense to use curvilinear forms in buildings, but in reality the construction remains challenging. Today I want to investigate the dynamic and curved line and form. Research by Vartanian and others indicate that curvilinear forms in interior residential architectural settings are perceived as less stressful. I want to study these and other effects curvilinear shape has on human beings. How do we perceive rectangular shape and curvilinear shape? What is the difference between the two? And is there a preference? Let's start with looking at neuroscience. A research team of designers, psychologists and neuroscientists, led by psychologist Vartanian of the University of Toronto, argue that neuroscientific data have an important role to play in bridging the conceptual gap between architecture and psychology. Their research team compiled 200 images of interior architecture. Some of the rooms had a round, others had a rectangular style. Vartanian slid people into a brain machine, showing them the people pictures and asked them to label each room as beautiful or not beautiful. They reported that test participants were far more likely to consider a room beautiful when it was flush with curves rather than full of straight lines. It seems that oblong couches, oval rugs, looping floor patterns got our aesthetic engines going. This isn't a man loves curves thing. Twice as many women as men took place in the study. Roundness seems to be an universal human pleasure. Vartanian and his research team took a second step in their study. They also captured the brain activity that occurred when the study participants considered the pictures. The outcome was that curvature appears to affect our feelings, which in return could drive our preference. Vartanian and his research claim that their results suggest that judgment of beauty for curvilinear spaces is underpinned by emotion and reward, consistent with the role that emotion is known to play in aesthetic experience. Continuing with environmental behavior and design. Moshe Bar, neuroscientist and director of the Multidisciplinary Brain Research Center at Bar-Ilan University, worked together with Mathiel Neta, who received her PhD in cognitive neuroscience at Dartmouth College. They worked together to prove that humans like curves. In their article, The Proactive Brain, they argue that our preferences for objects have been shown to be influenced by many factors, including symmetry, familiarity, contrast, complexity, and perceptual fluency. Preferences are significantly influenced by the nature of an object's contour, whether its edges are sharp, angled, or curved. Mossebar and Nita tested their hypothesis using stimuli that included pairs of emotionally neutral, real objects with their primarily pointed features and sharp angles, or the similar objects with curved features. Their outcomes show that we are aware of the perceptual features of an object, but not necessarily aware of their influence on our preferences. Many types of first impressions are determined unconsciously. People associate sharp contours with a dangerous object, such as a knife, even if the object is an everyday object with a neutral emotional meaning. Moshbar and Aneta suggest that people might learn to prefer objects that promote safety and fear objects that impede it. People learn to associate sharpness with potential danger and learn to stay away from objects that might hurt. Architect Madani Nejat researched in his thesis the emotional effect of curvilinear forms in interior design by the use of card sorting data and theory. His card sorting data results show positive values significantly increase as curvature increases in interior architectural settings. Curvilinear forms tend to make observers feel safer and perceive the safe as more private. Theoretically, Nejat refers amongst others to Hopkins, who discovered in 1976 that subjects have special attention recruiting levels for curvature. Hopkins created 4 categories of line segments for judging the amount of curvature. The results show minimum attraction for the straight line. On the other hand, an increase of intersection of curve contours will make the person experiencing confusion and anxiety. In the psychology of art, experiments indicate that people associate adjectives such as serene, graceful, tender, sentimental to drawings that contain curved lines. The same drawings with squares and angles have a tendency to suggest sadness and dignity. Similarly, Kühler in 1980 found that pleasure is more often elicited by round-off architectural forms than by square-edged. Curvilinear line segments are perceived to be more complex than straight lines. I would like to finish to take a final look at the organic architecture. In the philosophy of organic architecture, it is believed that flowing curved forms are more reconcilable with the human body and mindset. Architect and sculptor Christopher Day argues in Places of the Soul, Architecture and Environmental Design as a Healing Art that that things that are alive never fit exactly in any hard edges category. He makes the following distinction between straight and curved lines. Straight lines represent firmness, orientation and organization, and curved lines life and fluidity. We need to give life to the firm geometric and firmness to the non-straight in a way that the elements speak to each other. Day makes in his book the remark that shape affects relationships. Architect Philip Stedman raised the question why most buildings are rectangular. We can find buildings or parts of buildings which are not rectangular, such as igloos, Mongolian huts, tepes, Dogon and Talensi huts, temples, chapels and other small places of worship. These are often single spaces. A second type of situation in which curvilinear elements are often found is in the plans of buildings that may consist of many rooms is around the building edges. Stedman mentions that many of the otherwise rectangular churches have semi-circular apses. In classically planned buildings with many rectangular rooms, such as villas or country houses, there can be circular space deep in the interior, for example a central hall, but just to fill out the corners. The rectangularity in buildings has to do with the packing together of rooms in a plan. Rectangular rooms can readily be formed out of rectangular components of construction, and circularity in plan is often a characteristic of freestanding widely spaces. Contemporary architects do escape the rectangular by gravitating towards buildings with single room structures, such as art museums. Okay, I came to a conclusion. Early humans lived in caves, but in the summer they needed temporary shelters. First tents, but when they started to settle down to the business of agriculture and needed permanent settlement, village forming started. These first housings consisted out of singular room and were round shaped. Nowadays it's hard to find curved designs. Construction materials are designed for rectangular. Neuroscientific research teaches us a lot about the effect of using curvilinear shapes in architecture. A room with curves is perceived as more beautiful than a room full of straight lines. The ACC gets activated and deals with emotion. Curvature affects our feelings and drives our preference. Environmental behavior and design studies show us that preferences are derived by the nature of an object's contour, whether its edges are sharp, angled, or curved. People associate sharp edges with a dangerous object, even if the object is an everyday object with a neutral meaning. People learned to prefer objects that promote safety, therefore prefer curved objects over rectangular objects. Psychological research proved that positive values increase as curvature increases in interior architectural settings. Curvilinear tends to make observers feel safe and perceive the space as more private. Curvilinear segments are perceived as more complex, and people prefer higher levels of environmental variety and richness. Architect Philip Stedman provides us with an explanation why there are so many rectangular housings. It has to do with packing together rooms in a plan. The philosophy of organic architecture teaches us that straight lines present firmness, orientation, and organization, and curved lines life and fluidity. The art is to give life to the firm geometric and firmness to the non-straight. Thank you for watching, and if you like it, leave a like.